Every time it's different. Right. Sometimes it's 1, 2, 3. Sometimes 3, 2, 1. Right, so welcome everyone to episode 73 of the Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. Thanks for coming back and thanks for listening. And we are delighted to have you here, whether you're listening the second that it is released into your podcast feed or whether you are joining us, who knows, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. We're thrilled that you're listening at all. And as you'll know from listening to episode 72, we are still in Kyushu. James, in spirit more than in body, you've left me to go back to Yokohama, and I'm traveling for a couple of days on my own. But I'm following in your footsteps. What a difficult and challenging thing to do, to follow in those footsteps, especially the speed that they move. But I've managed to get myself to Miyazaki Station, which I have to say, James, I was very, very impressed with. And one of the reasons is, and I only realized this actually after the fact and talking to other people in Miyazaki. First thing is, I was lucky at all in my arrogance of thinking, oh, well, it's a regional city, I'll just be able to get somewhere to stay, no problem, to actually get somewhere to stay, because something to do with baseball. All the baseball teams go there off season. They do their training camps. Then loads of fans go down there and try and meet them and pick them up or whatever. And so it was actually one of the peak seasons, even though it was February, one of the peak tourist times in Miyazaki. And I was lucky enough to get somewhere to stay. But also then you get this really, it's a big golfing town too. So it feels like there's a lot of money. And what you get is this kind of crazy contrast between these really old, rundown Shotengai, some of which have been very badly damaged in an earthquake and are basically, I think, marked for demolition. And you still get one or two little, entrepreneurial bars and kind of snacks and stuff within them. And then you have a few of these really nice kind of Shotengai, really fancy streets, some lovely coffee shops, hipster, designer stores, some high fashion labels. And it's such an interesting contrast of different types of Japanese city. I think it really blew my mind. I wish I could have stayed there a bit longer.
Yeah, it's 100% right. I think it's quite different in that sense to some of the regional cities that we visited, where the sense of economic decline is so evident, and you have one street where you've got maybe a couple of those new type shops you mentioned, sort of hipster fashion brands or craft beer bar. But Miyazaki, and a big part of it, like you mentioned, sadly I was too late for the spring training. So yeah, all the Japanese baseball, a lot of the Japanese baseball teams train in Kyushu and Okinawa, so they're down there in the month of February, and then you've got the big golf tournaments as well. So there's something beyond just the typical Japanese tourism that brings a lot of people, and it doesn't have that sort of depressed economic feel. I did not particularly notice all the hipster boutiques, but I mean, then again, our interests sort of differ that way, Philip. I mean,
no surprise.
I did have a picture of one of the tattoo parlors. Did you maybe get a Miyazaki kanji? It seems like you really love the place. Did you get one of those? On your?
I tell you what, I got a piece of Wagyu tattooed on my right thigh because I had one of the greatest meals that I may have ever had in Japan.
Oh!
And that's a big statement. That's 20 years.
Yes,
I was walking along the Shotengai trying to find somewhere to eat. I sent you pictures of it, right?
It's something.
I might be wrong here, so please, if you're living in Japan or you're your Japanese food, do correct me. But basically, I think it's Wagyu katsu or something like that. But basically, what it is a Wagyu steak, which as people know, is the high end of Japanese beef. Miyazaki, I believe, is very famous for Wagyu. And it comes coated in this kind of katsu bread crumb, and then it's sliced really, it's sliced beautifully, and you get a little clay burner, and then just one by one, you barbecue this meat, and then there's a dipping sauce and the usual kind of accompaniments of rice and some cabbage and some soup, and I could have eaten like 3 of them, and it was one of those ones where you're so happy, because I walked up and down the show thing, and nothing really jumped out, and I'd seen this place and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to go back there, and got in just before it got busy, and just honestly, one of the best meals I've had.
I'm so bummed because my schedule when I visited was so tight. I also got caught up in a rainstorm. I never got a chance to do that. I had the complete opposite, Philip. I don't think I even ever told you this. I wasn't staying in Miyazaki City. I was staying a little down the coast in a place called Aoyama, in an old Showa era hotel that had distinct Shining vibes to it, And after I had arrived there, at 12:30 at night, completely soaked from the rain, just in a mess, woke up to a phone call. Oh, James, aren't you coming down for your reserved breakfast? The kitchen, we're about to close. And I was like, what? I don't think I had a reserved breakfast. And I went down there. Philip, imagine me in this old seaside Showa era hotel, and I walk into this gigantic dining room that is completely empty except for 7 staff members, all lined up, all waiting for me. Okay? They're all waiting for me, and I'm in you know me in the mornings, man. I'm in a foul state, okay? I was hungover. I was exhausted. And I was like, I don't remember ordering the breakfast. And I was like, okay, whatever. At least I'll get some coffee and some rolls. No, full-on Japanese breakfast, man, at 8:30.
I can imagine. So you're telling I can imagine 7 people just watching you pick through the things that are acceptable to eat in the morning.
And the lead lady,
Amazing.
the lead Oba-chan in the kimono, she's just like, oh, your Japanese is so good. Oh, you use chopsticks. Oh, then you must be no problem with all of this food. And I was just like, and I mean, because, remember, we're on the coast. You've got some sort of regional fish, and you've got crab and a lot of other things I didn't even know what they were. Of course, you've got the egg, and I'm just like, I've got to make the effort to at least dive into this, And yet I'm so hungover and exhausted, and they just won't leave. They're all standing there staring at me. You know what I mean? Because I was so late, and I'm like a foreigner. And it was really difficult. I plowed through about half of it, and then I just made an excuse like, oh, you know what? I'm really sorry. I got somebody coming to pick me up, and I'm running late. Thank you for the great food. I just ran out of there. But it was the polar opposite of you having the delicious Miyazaki beef. So I'm very, very jealous.
Well, yeah, it set me up rightly. I'll tell you, I was in a very good mood after that meal. But and also, again, I know we've talked about this many times, I think it's even more pronounced when you're on your own. just that sense of achievement that that morning had started at 5 o'clock. And the connections had worked out. I'd got to where I needed to go. I'd got to the 2 places in Takanabe, and then, made it back to Miyazaki. And, it's just that moment where you can say, okay, I'm going to chill, just have some food, relax. And then I headed off to, again, I think gotta be one of the places in my top 10 called Lifetime. Now, I know you'd been to that and you've talked about it again back in that, in those mid-40s episodes, but I mean, yeah, it's one of those places that, well, first of all, it according to their own sign anyway, it seems to open for kind of coffee, lunch, then closes again, and then reopens. Now it's along a street, and you go up the stairs. It's quite an unusual place because the front end of where the bar is you go up on the 2nd floor, and it's all glass, so you can kind of look out on the street, and then it runs back into the building where there's quite a large space for chairs and tables, and then actually for gigs as well. And because I got there just around 6 o'clock, the owner, and you probably have his name, it says it's open from 6 till midnight. He was still having his dinner. So when I got in, he was like, oh, yeah, come on in. But I sat at the bar, and, similar to some of the places like Corner Pockets, the one that springs out in particular, he wasn't moving. And I said, oh, no problem. But he just sat in this armchair right down in the corner of this kind of glass window balcony bit that protrudes out. And he just sat in his own chair in that corner, and he just picked away and finished his dinner. And I was quite happy to sit there because you're just, again, like your mind's blowing, right? You're just taking in all this stuff, and you're like, this place is incredible. And he's not worried. Like, he's just taking his own time. Now, it later emerged that and I'm led to believe not his wife, but his partner, she wasn't there. She'd been sent out on an errand, which I'll get to in a minute, because this whole sort of quite comical situation ensued with the two of them. But what was your impressions of him when you first met him?
Yeah, his name's Kusano-san. I have him as 72 when I met him. Okay, so he's 74 now. Well, he, again, with the timing, as I mentioned, I think in the previous episode, we did this entire itinerary of Miyazaki places in reverse order. So Lifetime was the first place I went to. When I arrived. I arrived on Friday afternoon. I got from the airport to the station, dropped my bag to your famous bag lockers that you love so much, and immediately went there, walked in, and he says, "Oh, I've been waiting for you," because I had called him the day before, and I was like, "Hi, I'm this foreign guy flying down from Tokyo, what time? I kind of have a tight schedule." So I'd done the whole spiel, and and so when I walked in, he was waiting for me. And I was like, okay, this is perfect, right? So there's nobody here. Like you said, he's open in the daytime. Very much got that feeling that he's kind of, as you'd say, he likes to hold court. You know what I mean? Because he's a veteran. So he said to me, he's like, "Oh, can I get you something to drink?" I was like, "Oh yeah, please, man. I just got off a plane. I'd love a cold beer." Like we mentioned, Miyazaki, a little bit humid, even at that time of year that I was there in March, getting a bit hot. I'm wearing a leather jacket, just flown in.
Nice.
And it was kind of like, yeah, give me a cold beer. And he's like, "Well, if you're drinking, I think I'll have a couple drinks too then." I was like, I didn't think this guy needed an invitation, right? It seemed like he's well happy to sit there and get the booze in. But he was extremely, extremely chatty. And the first thing he told me, Philip, I don't know if you got into that, was that he had spent a lot of time, like so many of our beloved jazz joint owners, hanging out in Shinjuku back in the days, and that, like a lot of the people who had gone to college in Tokyo or gone to work there, when they went back home, they not only opened a jazz kissa or jazz bar, but sometimes they even just took the same names. And they were like, well, screw it, like I'm 1,200 kilometers away. I'll just name my place the same as somewhere else. That's why you get like mokuba in different places, why you get so many dolphis or whatever, So he was saying that he was one of those guys, one of that generation of guys. And that Miyazaki, when he opened the place, was very sleepy, but, eventually they expanded the airport, they have a ferry, and like you mentioned, they've got the golf, they've got the onsen, they've got the baseball. So a lot of tourists come, and he was saying that a lot of their clientele are tourists.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, he wasn't. So he just had his dinner, and I don't think I've been in quite such an industrious environment. Well, there was the famous Matsu, where there was a lot of people coming in with little chits of paper and stuff. But he once he'd had his dinner, he was on that computer and he was doing stuff, and then he was up and down. And what then kind of ensued in between me ordering a drink and chatting to the female, I guess, owner, they run it together, but his partner, he had dispatched her out to buy some bowls in 100 yen shop, right? And she had come back with the bowls.
But what?
Yeah.
They don't serve food?
Like little bowls for like nuts and snacks and things like that.
Oh,
but whatever he was imagining was not what she had brought. So he came and he went through them and he opened them up and all, and he was like, no. And then I think one of them, he's like, oh, well, that one's okay. But whatever it was he was looking for, he wasn't happy. So basically he in the end, he got so annoyed that he went out to buy the bowls himself, which I thought, well, you could have just done in the first place.
He actually just got up and left to buy them. That's great.
He was just like, yeah, like I'll go and get them. So he went and got them. So then I was left with her for a while, and she was lovely and chatted away, and then just kind of found her own groove. And so she sat down, and she was actually looking. I think we'd been talking, and I told her what I was doing. I think maybe I'd said that you had been in, and so then she kind of pulled out the Kyushu Jazz Road again, and I was like, oh yes, I've seen that.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It's like if I see this book one more time, like so then she started to read it. So she just sat down behind the counter when he was out getting these bowls and started to read this Kyushu Jazz Road, and I was able to kind of wander around and take pictures, and you know, he when he came back, he chatted a little bit about, I know, like a lot of the gigs they do there, I think he records them. And I think what really came across to me was like, he is one of those real operators. Like, he was very canny and also very, like, the place is very much about him. And, you know, he's the kind of the thing. So there's this really odd little clay statue, which seems to be wearing the sort of hat that I can imagine you would wear, but it looks like they have this logo, which is Jazz Spot Lifetime, and it's essentially a Daruma, but I suspect it's kind of stylized to look a little bit like him. But this clay statue, I'll send you a picture of this now, has what looks like drumsticks. It has a cigarette. He's got this little kind of woolen hat on, and it's got glasses and a beard and eyebrows stuck on it. And it's obviously the owner, right? It's meant to look like the owner because, you know, if it was a Daruma, you could just get a Daruma. So I thought he was a very canny guy. And then when I asked for a t-shirt, he had boxes of new t-shirts. He was like, what size do you want? And he was like pulling them out from under the counter. And even the badge, you know, I said, oh, I'll take a badge as well. And I thought he would, you know, there'd be that, oh, you know, sure, just take that. But there was none of that. It was like, oh no, that's also 200 yen. And I just thought he seemed like one of those guys that's, you know, he's a real operator. It's not just like, it's obviously a very active place still. He's still running it as a going concern. They're still making money off it. They're still selling merch. They're still getting things made. And very different to a lot of the places where we see maybe like a t-shirt that's hanging up that, you know, will never be made again, or they've sold out of the t-shirts and that kind of stuff. So
I think that makes sense. That impression, I think, makes a lot of sense, because I've got in my notes where he talks about the sort of strategic side of booking gigs and how you have to balance it with gigs of groups that, and literally I have it in the notes here, that you might not really enjoy that group, but you know that they're going to bring in some good customers, so you book them anyway. And then on a weeknight, you can book the band that you like, even though you're only going to get 10 customers. So he's obviously got a business sense and an idea of like what the operations of the place should be. He also had some extremely critical comments actually about Japanese jazz musicians. He said that a lot of them, especially in the current generation, are not very good. And he listens to them to hear them out, but he's not very impressed. He thinks that they're just copying what's coming from the States. Philip, that's something that we've heard forever, but going back to what is now considered the golden era of J-Jazz, even the 60s and 70s, right?
Yeah, I think people have always said that, right?
They've always said that. It's like, oh, you're just copying Americans. And it's like, look, I mean, jazz is an American music, but I mean, we both know that there's a plethora of amazing Japanese jazz musicians. So, but you know, someone of his generation, maybe he grew up at that time. Everything was so focused on the new releases, and the Japanese stuff just didn't meet the grade for him. But it didn't stop him, because he's got gigs there all the time. I mean, I've got written here, it says that even during COVID, he was having sort of like jam sessions with just the local musicians who had nowhere else to play. So they would bring in their friends and family and try to like do like remember like in Japanese they call it nagesen. It's basically like, you know, like a tip jar, you know, and that's how they would try to like get the musicians to sort of like withstand this lack of activity during those 3 bad COVID years. So funny enough, he put on like a CD of someone called Kayoko Matsuzaki, which was a CD called Remembrance. It was like piano and recorded in Lifetime in 2022, interestingly. So again, you know, he's recording these, but not just recording them. He's like putting them out and selling them now. It was sort of slightly frustrating because I know, you know, we had this experience, you know, maybe 50-50 in Kyushu where you go to these places and we want to see them and enjoy them and experience them. But sometimes you leave feeling a little hungry because the music that's been played in them hasn't quite matched up with the space itself. And I suppose somewhere like that in particular, that, you know, I think he said
it was in its 49th year. So this is an old place, and you just want to hear something really heavy through that sound system and just like completely lose yourself in it. But I didn't quite get that experience.
He did that for me because I brought out the pushy New Yorker because, well, we talked about this on the previous podcast, but Philip, you must have been entranced by this as a photographer, like his amazing portraits of Sonny Rollins, playing on the famous ones on the beach. So I made him put on Sonny Rollins for me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that probably, again, is we talked about the Coltrane photo. I mean, I know you mentioned this in the previous episode. So this was one of the things that I wanted to see, and what he told me, at least, and I'm sure this matches with what you had, but it was a local photographer that he knew, and what they had done was arrange this photo shoot with Sonny Rollins on a beach. And I mean, you cannot overstate how it's bizarre. I mean, I know Sonny Rollins, spent a long time standing on a bridge playing. So in New York, so maybe it wasn't a big thing for him. But what you see, and again, only here because he said these are my private things, and these won't be shared. And I photographed them for my own reference, but again, I wouldn't put them out on Instagram and share them either. But what you have are these pictures of Sonny Rollins wearing this trench coat, baseball cap, and playing the sax on this fairly rough looking beach, and my understanding of it was that a typhoon was coming, so the photo shoot itself didn't really get any further than these images here.
No, Philip, it was not a photo shoot. They were taking the photos. It was a gig. They were going to have a gig on the beach, and at the sound check, the authorities canceled it. Because they were monitoring.
I thought it was a shoot.
Yeah. So of course there were photographers there. So they were, during the sound check time, they were trying to get these kind of, posed pictures, right, for whatever magazines or whatever. And then the authorities who were monitoring it, because that's the way that sort of the coastline sticks out at Miyazaki. They're ground zero for a lot of the typhoons, right? So they were basically monitoring it through the day, and it was kind of touch and go whether the gig could happen that evening. And finally, they were like, okay, we're getting back reports that it's just too dangerous. So they wrapped everything up. They got the photos in, but the gig had to get canceled because he moved on. I think he played. I think the next night they said something like he played in one of those. How do you say in Japanese again, Philip? Like kumin, the kumin kaikan, like the culture.
The sort of civic hall thing.
Yeah. The usual, sort of like civic hall gig. He had that the next night. So the beachside gig never actually happened, but they got this.
I mean, it's amazing. Like, I mean, there's a huge sort of probably a meter and a half high. Print, backed print just behind his computer. So every time you're sitting at the computer, and of course, I mean, that in itself is not enough. But also, Sonny Rollins, of course, signed it with best wishes too. So I mean, I just thought it was one of those things again, similar to that Coltrane photo that we talked about in Django, where it's something that's you're only ever going to see if someone takes it and shares it online. But you're only really ever going to go and see it, and certainly until such times that social media existed and so on, by going to Lifetime and hearing that story. And it's just like one of those many unique pieces of jazz history, oral jazz history and anecdotes that we've been lucky enough to be told by different owners. But there was also another weird photograph, which I can't remember if I told you this, but there was also another photograph which sparked a lot of discussion, totally unrelated to jazz, but it must have come up at some point that I was, or where I was from. So I must have said Ireland, and then specifically Belfast. And just behind the bar, just behind my back, I was sitting at the bar, and on the wall behind me was a photograph of a child, kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, but sort of stretching out and looking up. And it says, the caption says, Walkway, Angkor Wat, 1999. Well, it turns out that this was photographed by a man called Stephen R. Gentleman. That's his real name. And he was from Belfast and lived in Miyazaki for several years. I think he was there teaching, possibly. I think it was probably slightly before we came, so it would have been maybe early to mid 90s. And he was living in Miyazaki. He apparently became good friends with them. They used to, or still, write to him every year, or send him a card or something, or for a long time they did, and kept in touch with him. He used to apparently bring friends, like other teachers there, who weren't necessarily into jazz. And he was also a photographer, and he photographed this photograph and gave it to them, and it's still on the wall of Lifetime. And I just wonder if, first of all, if anybody who still lives in Japan that knows Stephen R. Gentleman and is still in contact with him, let us know. I've tried to have a look for him online to see if he's possibly back in Belfast, because I just thought it would be such an interesting story, like to tell him and to say that you'd seen his photo, and just one of those weird little coincidences that he also happens to be from Belfast. Like, so who knows, right?
I mean, that's yeah, I remember it's interesting because just having a quick check, it seems like there is a Dr. Stephen Gentleman, a professor of neuropathology in Belfast, Queen's University, who doesn't sound like the same guy unless he was giving a lecture at the University of Miyazaki. But that is just so random. It's so cool that he kept that, and that they're actually still communicating. It's amazing. Now, but Philip,
until recently anyway.
I must take issue though with your excessively proud commentary on the T-shirt that you got, because not only did you brag about it and then proceed to wear it for multiple days on your last trip, and I could not get my revenge because you see I got a Dolphy T-shirt from Dolphy and Miyazaki that on the back actually says Takanabe City 1993. But it was the only one he had left. It was a little too small for me, so I wear it only at home as pajamas. So I couldn't show off bringing it out to the bar in our last visits. But it's very more likely.
Well, he gave me a big sticker. I got a massive sticker from Dolphy because I said to him about the T-shirts. He said, I don't have any more, but he gave me this huge black and red sticker, which I've temporarily mislaid, but it's inside a record sleeve somewhere, until such times that my records are finally on a shelf after moving house, I'll not probably be able to locate it. But the T-shirt was, I probably should have, I feel bad because I probably should have got you one, but it's one of those T-shirts that it just hangs nicely. It's heavyweight. And it just says jazz and booze on the back, which, more or less, if you had coffee, it would just sum up the whole thing, right? So,
no, but
it's a beautiful
glad
T-shirt.
To hear that you said that he's got like a full box. I'm sure I could easily call him up, and even if he didn't remember me, just be like, "Hey, listen, man, I'm in Yokohama. Send me a T-shirt. I'll send you the money," because I want to add that to the growing pile of jazz T-shirts that we have. So.
Well, look, that was Lifetime. So I spent a couple of hours there. Actually, it was really nice. And again, one of those, where you're, obviously I'm on my own at this point, so there's less chat. But similarly, you get that time to maybe relax a bit more. We weren't, I wasn't rushing to get somewhere else. We weren't trying to hit a schedule in the same way. And it was coming to the end of what had been a fairly intense few days. So it was a really nice place to go and relax. I didn't leave there till after 8, so I must have sat for a good long time, just reading and relaxing. And then, hoping to finish with a full house of 4 places down Miyazaki way. But sadly, it ended on somewhat of an anticlimax, which, then took on an even sadder dimension to it a couple of days later. So the final place, again, sticking with the Dolphy theme, was called Far Cry, which opened, I think, according to the sign, 1994. So I went looking for Far Cry and I passed it a couple of times and then eventually managed to locate it. And I sort of had a sinking feeling because when I was in Lifetime, they had tried calling for me. And the female owner had been very much like, oh yeah, I've heard he's not that well recently, and I'm not sure they're still got the same hours, and they're not. And it was there was a lot of uncertainty. She then called, I think, possibly 2 numbers, the mobile and the shop, and no response. But I, optimistic as ever, I thought, right, well, I'll head round and have a look. And sadly, of course, when I arrived there, I found the sign in the lobby, but not plugged in and not out in the street where you'd expect to find it. I then took the lift up. There's a little, someone had written Far Cry and on a piece of paper and sellotaped it next to number 2 on the lift. And I took it up just to see, but it was one of those places where when the doors open on the second floor, there's no landing. It just goes directly into the shop. And so there was just a shutter. So I knew definitively that Far Cry wasn't open. And then that was on the 13th of February. And then, of course, as we both know, on the 15th of February on the Far Cry Instagram feed and in other places, someone went on there and announced that sadly the owner had passed away. And so that was just 2 days after I'd been there. Now, I know that you did manage to get there. So just remind me from episode 45 or 46, what was it like and what did I miss?
Well, it's weird because it was a beautiful place, very much a bar, like a nighttime bar. And right when you walked in, like you mentioned, the elevator opens, you go straight in and you're just looking along the front windows, and that's sort of where the register is on the back wall, like a counter. And he was sitting behind there on like a high stool reading a newspaper. And again, the exact same greeting that we got at Lifetime. He's like, "Oh, I was waiting for you. You called me yesterday, didn't you?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that was me." And he was a friendly guy. And so we walked back to the bars along the back wall, and there was tons of photos and clutter all around the place, but not in a kind of not in a messy way. It was very much arranged. It was just that he had a lot of different framed photos of albums of musicians and a lot of like knick-knack top things, like sort of like, animals and masks. I know, Philip, you love a good mask, so you would have liked that because he had
love a mask.
Quite a few masks that looked like they were from places outside Japan, whether Polynesia or Southeast Asia or even Africa. I'm not sure. So that, of course, he had a gigantic framed poster of the ubiquitous Sonny Rollins as a samurai, which seems to be a standard for all Kyushu jazz joints. They have to have one, right? And he also had a lot of like flower arrangements around. So obviously, like somebody had been bringing fresh flowers, or somebody did it, or he did it. It was just it was the kind of bar that, like, if this was a bar in your local neighborhood, you would be a regular there, even if it was no jazz playing. It was that kind of place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the photos. I mean, again, that now ubiquitous Sonny Rollins poster of him as a samurai, but it's clear from the Instagram feed that someone has, after respectful time has passed, taken it over. There's kind of a few posts, and then it seems to have reopened. And I noticed that more recently they've had a kind of a non-genre day. So I don't know if the music policy has always been like that or it's changed a little bit. I see like George Harrison, Eric Clapton, Delaney and Bonnie with a sort of 60s focus. But also you can see, there's another day where it's a Blue Note special. So maybe this is just something that they're doing where they're kind of having a particular focus.
I would imagine that's something that's new. Like, I think from the notes I had when I talked to him, like he told me he used to live in Shinjuku, so he used to go to the Pit Inn and stuff. And he was another guy who was like, analog, no smartphone. That the venue, that the shop was his living room. This is where he lived. That's why he was reading the paper when I went in and having a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? And so if a customer comes or don't come, it didn't really matter to him. Oh, you're here. Okay, I'll put on a jazz record. And interestingly, he wasn't from Kyushu. He was actually from way up north, from Yamagata Prefecture. But had settled down there, I think, after getting married. Now, Philip, I have in the notes here, it says 70 years old, 2022. Doesn't look it, says he was sick, looks pretty good. And I think we're, the link that we're both looking at, right? There's a picture of him smiling. He's got glasses on. He looked really well. He told me he had been hospitalized for quite a long while. So obviously this was a recurring illness. I guess maybe I caught him when he was in recovery or remission. I'm not sure what the illness was, but it was a bit of a shock to hear that just 2 years after I saw him that he had passed at the age of 72, because he did seem really unlike a lot of the people we've talked about. he seemed in pretty good shape. So it was kind of a bit of a shock to hear that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's just a reminder of, that fragility of some of the places. And I mean, on a selfish note, it was a shame not to have seen it, not to have met him. And coming at the end of what had been a brilliant trip, but also I think just a really stark reminder of how quickly things change and how quickly places that have been there in some cases, for 20, 30 years or longer can just go now happily, as it seems, certainly from the Instagram feed. Like some places like this will continue to sort of preserve the memory of the owner and preserve that legacy, but it's not always the case, as we well know. So it was a bittersweet ending, I suppose, to the trip, and unfortunate not to have made it, and quite literally, had I booked those tickets a week earlier, the chances are I might have got in and possibly met him or seen Far Cry. But that's just, as we know from our experiences right across Japan, like that's how it goes, some places we see and some places we don't, and at least Far Cry will continue. And again, just to have those two incredible, I don't know what the relationship between them was, but I presume from the fact that the owner was able to call up Far Cry and have that personal contact, that there's no animosity, and maybe they collaborated on stuff and did that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, quite a intense trip, considering I arrived and initially got there, and almost immediately we were in Brownie. And sometimes when I look back at all these photos, it's a bit of a blur. And this trip for me, before I got back, I mean, at this point I hadn't actually been in Tokyo yet, and we're about 5 or 6 days in. So after this, I headed out for possibly an even more epic journey on the final day. Final day and night before returning finally to Tokyo and going to a few more slightly chilled places with you. So we'll probably pick that up in the next episode, in episode 74. And I would say, just as a teaser, this place, just in terms of the place itself and the journey and the experience there, could be vying for top spot of all time, I think.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to have to, aggressive, but undoubtedly top 10 in all of my categories of how I do my systematic rankings, which you might remember from our favorites episode that we did a couple years ago, where I spent maybe 4 to 5 days putting out all my different rankings in different cross categories to come up with a very complex formula to get to my top choice. Whereas as we started recording, you were just like, oh yeah, about 5 minutes ago I wrote up a list. It just shows the dedication.
That's how I work on instinct.
The difference of dedication that we both bring to this project. But yeah, no, the next joint will be, and it's really interesting too, because like you said, you fly back to Tokyo. Don't really take much of a break, and then just like get back on the train and head way up north.
This trip was probably the most intense of all. I think it was an absolute, like, when we wrap it all up at the end of this particular series of episodes, it'll be interesting just to go back and look at how many places. I think we talked about it early on, but just even the number of days and I remember coming back, I mean, it was never meant to be a holiday in the first place, but coming back, and albeit I was back again in May, after being there in February, it was definitely far and away the most intense. Like, we never stopped, but that's the work, and it's all worth doing. And hopefully, if you're listening still, that you are also enjoying those adventures and reaping the benefit from all that running around the country as well. And we do appreciate your listenership. We appreciate your support. It's such a nice feeling to see when a podcast gets released at 10 a.m. on a Sunday that, almost instantly there's 50 or 100 people listening to it. It's a thrill, and
getting a lot
repeating.
of
we appreciate it.
A lot of unsolicited comments from people who are listening from around the world, via mail, via social media. They come in quite a lot. It is always, yeah. It just makes us inspired to keep going, man. And yeah, we've still got quite a few adventures to get through. With upcoming episodes before your next trip. Philip, I will catch you offline to discuss when that will be, hopefully sooner. And then pretty soon we'll have an update as well about the ongoing AegoCon project. But stay tuned for more details on that. Yes, I will talk with you again soon, my buddy.
All right, always a pleasure. Talk to you.
You bet. Take it easy, man. Bye-bye.